Hi, I'm Sam Guthrie from National Museums Northern Ireland. I'm here to present a Storied Isle, recordings from Rathlin in the NMNI Sound Archive. Home to just 150 people, Rathlin Island holds an elevated place in the oral traditions and history of Ireland. Perhaps this claim is owed entirely to its unique location, a maritime crossroads between Scotland and Ireland. Or perhaps there's an element of its status owed to the passion and pride with which its residents tell the storied history of their island. A pride that's evident from Linda Ballard's tape-recorded interviews for the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, now held in the Sound Archive of National Museums, Northern Ireland. Wary of my limited time today, I'll only briefly introduce Rathlin's historical narrative. It's been addressed in greater detail elsewhere. Because I'm seeking to approach the island's oral history thematically, offering some broad conclusions which can be drawn from the archive and suggesting where future work may lead. Rathlin features prominently throughout the archaeological and historical record of Ireland and Scotland. Axe heads of probable Rathlin origin populate the prehistoric end of that chronology, with the broadcast of early radio transmissions at the latter. Between these points, Vikings, Scottish kings and spiders, land disputes and blood feuds have featured as key chapters in the island's narrative. Today, however, I want a small handful of voices from past Rathlin residents to drive this presentation forward. You'll hear from Isabella McKenna, the last native speaker of East Ulster or Rathlin Irish, brothers Alec and John Anderson, who recall one of the worst maritime disasters just beyond living memory on the islands. And most of all, Tommy Cecil, the fearless, free-thinking ferryman and raconteur who acted as the unofficial custodian of the island's culture and law and the one-time rescuer of Richard Branson. Thematically, first I'll focus on the performative aspects of oral history and how across several interviews, Tommy Cecil amalgamates Rathlin's folklore with its history. Second, I want to focus on the maritime setting of Rathlin, how this has shaped individuals' relationships with the island and highlight an example of the process of myth-making in action that was witnessed by Linda Ballard. Third, I want to remark on the common conclusion amongst interviewees that the loss of the Irish language on Rathlin marked a key transitional point and highlight the some avenues of ongoing research. In the space of a century, less than a century, the island saw two massacres that saw the near complete destruction of its local population. The second of these was the Campbell Massacre, and that's one that has remained close in the minds of interviewees in Linda Ballard's recordings. In 1642, Duncan Campbell landed on Rathlin with 1,600 troops. Ostensibly, he was hoping to quell rebellion across Ireland in a larger way. But really, this was just an attempt to square a bigger clan feud. This was just under pretext, as it were. A battle was offered by the MacDonalds, the residents. A battle was offered, but it was one-sided, to say the least. And eventually, the women and children were reportedly thrown from the cliffs of the island. But interviewees like Tommy Cecil recall it for acts of resistance and even of survival.
I don't know whether you've ever heard of the story about this time the Campbells. There's one of them come there this evening. The Campbells raided the island. They killed everybody in the island. But there was this particular woman. She was one of the last to be thrown over the cliffs down Slughnamore, that's down the west side, and of course they them all rounded up. You see that they were making them undress before they threw them over, you see. So one woman says to one of the Campbell soldiers, says, "If you're a gentleman," she says, "you'll turn your back while I undress." So he turned his back and she grabbed hold of him and jumped over along with him, took him with her. She knew there was no escape for her, so she took him with. But this other woman, she was one of the last to be thrown over. And she landed on top of all the rest of the ones that had gone down before her. And she only suffered a broken leg, and there was a boat passing quite close to the shore, and they seen her. And they went in. She must have waved to them or something. They picked her up, took her to Scotland, and by good luck, it was some of the McDonalds. It was nearly all McDonalds was on the island at that time anyway. And I suppose they were coming to see if there was any survivors. But anyway, she took her to Scotland and she got all right, and a couple of years after she decided to come back, come back to her old home. She come back to it, landed her on this side, and her home was down just about Bushett Loch there. You can still see the remains of the walls there. It was pointed out to me as the house anyway. But she come to the top of the hill, and she seen a smoke in the house. So she decided somebody else must have taken it over. And she sat lay at the top of the hill and watched for a long time. She seen a young man coming out of the house and going to the well for water. She thought she recognised him, so she went down. And here down wasn't her own son. He was only a small boy, and he ran out, and there was a mutton or something at the back of the house, and he jumped onto it and hidden it, and went all the way.
Obviously, this isn't a retelling of trauma that exists within living memory. Rather, it's an example, to paraphrase Lynn Abrams, of squaring the memory circle. Tommy constantly filters historical fact through the lens and influence of Rathlin's deep tradition of folklore. It's a process illustrative of the performative amalgamation of individual and communal memory into an explainable whole. He acts as a late-style example of a 19th century ethnographer. He has collected Rathlin stories encyclopedically for their preservation and perseverance through the act of storytelling. Moreover, Cecil's extensive storytelling repeatedly touches on one inescapable fact of Rathlin's life: its absolute proximity to the sea. In one interview, Tommy recounts how he learned how to predict the island's weather, its tides, its currents via vernacular observation, those which he drew from the environment, the world around him. Although even these observations have a twinge of the folklore to them, and even they are filtered through that folklore, as we'll see in this next example.
Family on the island. You know how the Banshee would follow families. You've heard that story. Well, there's this family on the island. Before any of them die, there's usually a boat scene.
Oh, yeah.
And I have seen it myself, and other people in the island have seen it. And it's a boat with six swordsmen on it, and it was seen at different times, and not so very long ago it was seen on the island.
These oarsmen are a sort of local stand-in for the Banshee on the mainland. They're seen just before someone dies. They're a point of reference that both marks the island as different but similar. It's a variation on a theme. Sadly, Tommy himself died in a diving accident, died after a diving accident in 1997. Another death connected to the ocean in Rathlin. Although his voice contributes to at least 4 of the interviews in the archive, it's not the only one that is interested in and centres the seascape on the topic of Rathlin. Indeed, all the interviewees place it quite central to their narrative. Alec and John Anderson, some of the eldest residents that were interviewed by Linda Ballard in the 1970s, did so as well. In this example, Alec leads his brother in the interview. He takes the lead. And when it comes to reciting a poem about the SS Lochgarry, John really takes the lead and drives that forward. We'll begin this example from some of the poem, and then I'll skip ahead to Alec's recollections.
It's not much good, but
the Lochgarry, she come on during the war down there. We were all over 30 crews around it.
And on the month of February in Darkins one night, the skipper of the Lochgarry sailed the easy tunnel of his guiding light. They sailed her up along the lawn till they struck the back of Tor. They put her out and ran about until the sailors were on the deck to stand. And the next place they left her was in Madagala Sound. They called to them to lower their boats and on to them to go. And the first light they were taking sight to head for Achry shore. Ran the boats to grip the oars, gripping in their hand. They said to one another, and I must do the best they can. A crew of hardy sailors and from their homes did go, so little they thought their bones would be got along the Achry shore. The skipper was a cruel man when he took that shallow ground, and when he got himself safe ashore, let his sailors there be drowned.
Could you describe you know what you did yourself? Could you tell me what you actually did?
Well, we were alarmed here at 5 o'clock that morning. A neighbour up there, Alec McCurdy, he's dead now, come to that room one bit and he said there was a trip ship and NMNI started away with the mountains. Oh, they were scattered away here and there through the mountains, some of them lying in the water here and there. And when daylight broke, went away down then to the shore, and bodies were floating about through the water there. The boats lying wrecked. Some of them wasn't right dead, some of them. We carried 15 bodies where the life chart got at them at the lake.
In John Anderson's poetic retelling of the sinking of Lochgarry, we see the bridging between the performative aspects of folklore and the standard telling of history. His words exemplify the performative space between recount and oral tradition. John bore witness to these events, but he describes them in the creative medium of poetry. It's an interesting exercise for the listener to assess where John's account ends and the reality of Alex's recollections begin of the bodies being brought in. These same shipwreck stories arise elsewhere in the archive, particularly in Tony McQuaig's interviews and discussion of the history behind the names of various shipwrecks that have found their way onto the walls of the eponymous McQuaig's pub, where the Lochgarry now stands alongside those of Her Majesty and the Girvan. Throughout the interviews conducted on Rathlin, participants marked a particular break with the past, a dislocation that separated their contemporary experience from that of the oral traditions of Rathlin, something that they felt that the island was at a great loss for. Interestingly, not one of the people interviewed associates this with those climactic events that nearly wiped the population out in the 16th and 17th centuries. They say it's something that's more in the recent past. Tommy Cecil suggests it's something that lays with his own parents. So Tommy Cecil suggests it's something that lay with his grandparents. The Anderson brothers pinpoint it to something lost with their parents. And Bella McKenna is aware that it was in her own lifetime. That is, in each case, they associate the loss of the Irish language on Rathlin as the most significant break with its past. McKenna, in her mid-90s when she was interviewed in 1985, was the last speaker of Rathlin Irish.
Have you got the Hail Mary? Oh, I see him here.
Si the very to lodge in a grass at a cheer la, Spanier and a mal, Spanier and he's a neighbor, Mahri Jigger and a packy, Nisakasir and a Basha Ben. Taking fishing.
Take him. Okay, so we'll on.
She laments the gradual loss of her own Irish. In an interview, she no longer recalls the names of every month. But her grandson, he highlights the extant idiosyncrasies of her Irish, its unique Rathlin or East Ulster qualities. Evocatively, the beginning of the language's marked decline on the island coincides with the rise of radio. In 1898, at the direction of Marconi, the world's first commercial radio signals were successfully broadcast from the island and received on the mainland. By the 1930s, there were only 19 speakers of Irish identified on the island. The youngest of these was recorded as 40, and the average age of those recorded was 67. While there's a storytelling quality to once a couple one's rise with the other's decline, it's really a confluence of events of economic and technological forces that were beginning the decline on the island. Traditional shared farming practices were ending, local mills were closing, and many islanders, like Bella, emigrated to Belfast and beyond. Although some islanders remained, and so too their children, and when Linda Ballard arrived in the late 1970s, many were prepared to talk about their own island lives, to engage in memory work and attempt to square their own storytelling circle, just as she sought to complete some of the work of the Ulster Folk Museum. This work emphasises the role today of conducted by UOSH. Rathlin is Northern Ireland's only inhabited island, yet it was still one of the last places for the Folk Museum to go to gather narratives from. Our team has returned to those tapes to rescue at-risk audio, to digitise and preserve for future generations. Our work offers future opportunities also. It could be a key reference point for a return to Rathlin Island to study a once more growing community, or to utilise in comparative studies. The archive can exist there to be compared with those archives and those recordings across Ireland from other islands. Cataloguing this part of the collection has really opened a window and a turning point in the history of the Rathlin narrative. It's been a unique opportunity to hear its past residents and their testimony. It's valuable not only holistically to Irish studies, but also to the residents there themselves today, and some of them have taken an active interest so far. These are residents of Rathlin offering a practical story of island life that illustrates not only how they have felt isolated in the past, but also how they have been resilient as an island and carried on, and taking that pride that has carried them through to a new generation and a new population today. Well, thank you for your time.